Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. I've had several conversations with people about homeschooling in the past where they have expressed some sort of interest in one day homeschooling their kids, but they always seem to have this response that homeschooling was just not what their child was made for. Their child just wasn't cut out for homeschooling. And today I'm going to explain to you why homeschooling is for every child. There seems to be this ongoing narrative with a lot of parents that their kids just aren't cut out for homeschooling. And they have a lot of different reasons of why they think their kids weren't cut out for homeschooling. Sometimes it could be because of what they consider the socialization issue. Other times their child might have some special needs that they themselves, the parents, don't have the confidence to work through with their kids. And, it could also just be the way that their kids learn. But, what we need to remember is that thousands of years of parent-led education proves otherwise. All children are cut out for homeschooling. So where's the discrepancy? Why is it that it seems that so many kids just wouldn't be a good fit for it? And first of all, I think that a lot of times that's just a notion that the parents themselves are coming up with. Sometimes they themselves aren't really confident. They don't really want to do it. So it's just easier to say, well, my child isn't cut out for homeschooling. But one thing that we really have to look into is that social engineering plays a huge role in how people look at education and how they look at the way that they think their kids should be learning. And that is really the main reason that so many people feel this way about their kids. And I think it's sad because, as I mentioned, this for thousands of years, for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, parents were central to a child's education. That was where kids learned from. Their parents were their teachers. People in their community were also helping out, teaching them. But it never was about, the experts that we think nowadays that every child needs experts teaching them. And, that's all a part of the social engineering that has been going on since the beginning of compulsory schooling. Compulsory schooling really set us in this way of thinking that there are only certain ways to do things, and the way of doing things is the way that school does things, and no other way is an equally valid way, despite the fact that, so much evidence does not agree with that. So, first of all, let's look at some of the social engineering that causes people to think about this. And the very first one that I'm going to talk about is just this societal obsession with experts. People nowadays think that they need experts for everything. No one seems to have confidence in their God-given talents. And, it's popping up everywhere that, people, it seems that they need to have someone holding their hand through everything that they do. And, nowhere is this more evident than in, a lot of the population's idea that kids will not learn properly if they don't have a licensed teacher teaching them. This couldn't be further from the truth. To be honest, I've mentioned this several times before, but the literacy rate was higher before compulsory schooling than it is now. It was higher before compulsory schooling than it ever has been. As soon as they did adopt compulsory schooling and put those laws into place, the literacy rate has actually steadily declined over the years. And, before compulsory schooling, no, there were not licensed teachers teaching these kids. Very often it was their parents, or it was, teachers in one-room schoolhouses who very often were just teenagers who maybe got through an 8th grade level of school. So, this whole technocracy idea. That's what technocracy is, just the idea that, everything has to be done by experts. Experts have to be in charge of everything. And I'm going to say experts loosely, because a lot of times what we consider to be experts really aren't experts at all. Do they have that piece of paper? Yes. But does it mean that they have the answers to everything? Absolutely not. And there are so many different areas of life that I see this happening besides just, with teachers. And, that would be like a whole other video completely. But, some ways that I see this is a lot of times you have people, there's just this overabundance of the use of therapy nowadays. And, I'm going to say that I used therapy with my kids. One of my kids had speech therapy and several of my kids had physical therapy. And it seems like doctors are constantly recommending therapists for every little thing for children. And so I had the experience of going through this. I had one come into my house, maybe like once or twice a week. And what I realized as each of my children like graduated out of the therapy, what I realized was that none of the things, while the therapists were always very nice and very helpful, and my kids genuinely enjoyed their company, none of the things that they were doing with my kids were things that I hadn't already been doing with my kids to begin with. And, I realized that how much can an hour a week actually help? So, it hit me one of these times that after all of my kids had stopped having therapy, it hit me that my kids would have reached their milestones in their own time. I don't believe that it was necessary for any of my kids to have ever had that therapy. And I truly believe that a lot of times doctors will get kickbacks for recommending therapists. I think there's some kind of a partnership or a cooperation there. And I think that's why it happens so often. Am I saying that no kids absolutely need therapy? Of course not. There are definitely kids out there who definitely need to have some sort of therapy. But I think that it's just thrown around way too loosely nowadays, and it has really been demeaning to the confidence of parents, because nowadays parents seem to think that everything is wrong with their kids, and they're constantly seeking out the attention of experts, when honestly common sense should just prevail and let them know that no, they've got this, and that no one is the expert of their kids but parents. Okay. So there also is this preoccupation with socialization because of school. Before compulsory schooling was started, socialization wasn't a thing. It wasn't something that people thought about. Kids were out in the real world, and they were interacting with their family, with community members. The idea that we have of socialization nowadays, people always kind of link school to socialization. And it's ironic that their idea of socialization is 30 kids sitting in a room, what I like to call a box, with other children that they're not supposed to talk to. Very often, they're not even supposed to talk to them in the hallway. A lot of schools nowadays have silent lunches. And I have even been hearing about schools where the kids are not allowed to talk at recess. So where is this socialization happening? And the fact is that the socialization that is so popular amongst naysayers of homeschooling, people don't realize that the only place that you will ever see that sort of socialization is in school. There is no time ever, other than in school, that people are going to be confined with a group of other people who are all the same age as them, and who are all from the same area, and who are all doing the exact same things as them. That doesn't happen in real life. Even if you work an office job, you're not going to work on a floor where only people your age are there, and they're not all going to be doing the exact same things that you do, and they're not all going to be from your neighborhood. So this idea that you need school to socialize, it just doesn't make any sense if you actually think about it. And beyond that, I know that a lot of people are concerned that their kids will not have friends if they are homeschooling. If they take them out of school, their kids will no longer see their friends, and then their kids are going to be lonely. And the thing is that just because you take your kids out of school doesn't mean that they never have to see their friends again. You can always set up play dates with your kids' friends when the other kids are not in school. Not all of your child's social interactions have to happen with other homeschoolers. My kids, they don't even interact really with any other homeschoolers at all because we don't have any in our area that they can interact with. All of the interactions that my kids have are with neighborhood kids after school. And for some reason, I think that this really throws a lot of people off. They kind of think of homeschooling, okay, they only should be interacting with homeschoolers and it should be happening during school hours because they're home then. But no, homeschoolers are home all day. They can interact with their friends once they're done with school. No one ever said that couldn't happen. Or if they're teenagers, yeah, they can still go with their friends. They can go to the movies with them. Their friends can come over. There is no rule that says that, friendly interactions have to stop once school stops or once you start homeschooling your kids. So, that's something that you really need to think about as well. And, just broaden your idea of where you think that your kids should get their friendships from, because just look beyond this box or this tunnel vision of just finding fellow homeschoolers for your kids. Your kids can be friends with the neighbors. They can play with relatives if they have relatives close to their age. They can play with their friends from school, from when they were back in school. And yeah, of course, you can look for co-ops. I'm not saying don't do that. You can look for co-ops and you can look for homeschool groups, or you can enroll your kids like in art classes or dance classes, and they're likely to find some friendships there. But don't ever think that it isn't going to happen or that your kids will never see their friends from school again. The only way that your kids will never see their friends from school again is if you aren't intentional about seeing to it that it does happen. Another piece of social engineering that we have is, school has engineered into us the notion that the family isn't enough. The idea that, kids have to be around other people. And this kind of links into the socialization aspect. But I have actually had people say to me, is it even healthy for parents to educate their own kids? And that is like the tone of voice that they used with it. And people have completely forgotten their history and that this was always normal. And it is so popular nowadays to hear people saying things like, when you bring up homeschooling and parents educating their own children, a lot of people will say, yeah, but you know what? It takes a village to raise a child. You know what? When that saying actually started, when they were referring to village, they were referring to like family members and to a close-knit community of people who actually knew each other, who like lived near each other, who worked together, who grew up together, and were almost like family in themselves. And nowadays, when people refer to, this village, they're referring to teachers who are pretty much strangers to kids, and they're referring to principals who very often don't even know the names of all the kids in their schools. So this whole idea that the family isn't enough, again, it doesn't match up with what we know from history. What we have seen is that there has been a decline in morality, there has been a decline in literacy, and yes, there has been a decline in academic knowledge since that model of the family being the center of the education being taken away via schooling. And another I'm like reading this because I had so many, but another social engineering aspect that we have is just this mistruth that school portrays the real world. That's why a lot of people also think that their kids wouldn't, be good for homeschooling, or they're not a good fit for homeschooling, because they think that their kids wouldn't be able to relate to homeschooling because school gives them a taste of the real world. But, think about it. This is going back to the whole idea of socialization in the classroom. School is not an accurate representation of the real world. Kids are stuck in a building all day for 7 to 8 hours a day. They have to raise their hands to go to the bathroom. Where else does that happen in life? They a lot of times aren't allowed to talk as they pass classes in the hallway. Where else does that happen in life? They very often have to sit down in assigned seats when they eat. A lot of times they're not even allowed to talk to each other, and they have such a regimented time of when they are allowed to do everything. How is that an accurate representation of the real world? The only comparison that I can make honestly is between that of school and what things are like in a prison. In a prison, the prisoners are, they have to eat at a certain time, and they have to go out in the yard at a certain time, and they're allowed to walk at a certain time, and they are not allowed to talk to each other at certain times. And it just seems like that is the only reasonable comparison that you can make between school and the real world, because the real world is nothing like school. Nothing. And so the last social engineering that we have had ingrained in us for the last, several generations is that there's this idea amongst a lot of parents that our kids are someone else's problem. And that could be another reason that some parents are just feeling like, their kids aren't cut out for homeschooling, because they aren't comfortable with keeping their kids home with them. And too often I have heard people say things, if their child was misbehaving or if they were having some sort of problems with their kids, they would just blow it off and say, I'll let her teacher deal with her, and that happens more than it should. It shouldn't happen at all, but it's something that in some communities you hear all the time. And it really is because people think that they no longer have the sole responsibility of their kids. They think that someone else also has responsibility of their kids, and they are often only too willing to kind of pass the buck when things get tough and let someone else deal with it. And that isn't the way that it's supposed to be. No one is responsible for your children but you. And I know that a lot of times it can be hard to get used to having your kids with you all of the time, especially if they have been in school and you've been used to having that time all day long without them. But the more time that you spend with your kids, the more used to it you are, the more used to your kids you get, and they get more used to you. And you've got to look at it this way. So often people are like, but my kids drive me crazy when they come home from school. How am I going to deal with them all day? The fact is that the reason that you have such an issue with your kids when they come home from school is because you are basically getting what's left over of them. Your kids have very likely had to get up very early in the morning, sometimes when it's still dark outside. Then they have to go to school. They sit at a desk all day long, writing, watching PowerPoints, going to assemblies, changing classes, raising their hands to go to the bathroom, going over homework, getting assigned other homework. And sometimes they're going to like after school programs, or they have sports afterwards, or they have musical instrument classes afterwards. And then they finally come home at the end of the day. They are completely exhausted. But on top of that, they've got mounds of homework that they also have to do, that they had to bring home because for some reason 7 hours of school isn't enough for them to do the rest of their work. So then they have to sit and do piles of homework once they get home, when all they want to do is sit and relax and veg out. Is it any wonder that your kids are cranky when they get home? Anyone would be cranky if that is something that they had to deal with every single day for at least 13 years of their lives. You have to think about that. So when you have your kids home with you and they're not having to leave and do these things all day, you are going to see a marked change in your child. It might not happen overnight, but it will happen. And so that's, where we come to, feeling this way that, your kids aren't cut out for homeschooling. It's very common. And as you can see, there are reasons that we feel this way. So it's not like it's something that only a few people feel. A lot of people feel this way. But there is a way that you can deal with this. And the best way to deal with this, if you truly do want to homeschool and you think, in all honesty, that your kids are not cut out for homeschooling, the one thing that I can tell you to do, take your kids out of school and detox them from school. Usually they call this deschooling. And I have done several videos on deschooling, but I really like the word detoxing better, because that is what your kids need. They need to detox from school. They need to get it out of their system. They need to realize that they no longer have to wake up really early all day long, and they no longer have to live this strictly regimented life that they've been living for however long they were in school for. So when you are detoxing from school, you basically want to live as if there was no such thing as school. And that's why a lot of times when people do pull their kids out of school, I will tell them, don't worry about having them do any schoolwork at first. Let them get used to being home first. And you as the parent, you very often need to get used to having your kids at home too. So this detoxing time is a great thing for you to do too. And what you can do is you can spend that time doing things with your child, or just letting them explore their own interests that they likely never had time to do before. And as they're doing these things, watch them, see how they like to do things, see how they like to learn. What is it that they choose to learn about? And in the meantime, you could be reading up on different styles of homeschooling or different methods of education. You don't need to jump from one school right into homeschooling. Give yourself and your kids that detox time, and you will very quickly see that every child is cut out for homeschooling. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram because YouTube always disables my comments. And if you like my work, you can check out my Patreon page and see what rewards I have for my patrons there. I will leave that link in the description box as well. And today I want to give a shout out to another Patreon patron, Carrie. Thank you so much for sticking by me all this time. I just am so happy and so grateful to have the support of people who are like-minded and who are feeling that I've helped them in some way. That's really, it's a nice way for me to, it's a nice thing for me to feel. Anyway, I hope you all have a great night.